Okay, we'll call the Tuesday, August 27th Board of Adjustments meeting to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the June 23rd, 2019 meeting. Is there a motion?
And see, make a motion to approve the minutes of the July 23rd, 2019 meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay. There's a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Moving on to item number 2, new business, an appeal of an administrative decision. And Aaron, I'll let you go.
Thank you and good morning. So just to start things off with, this is an appeal of an administrative decision for item 2A. It's been probably a couple years since you guys have, the Board of Adjustment has seen this type of application, so I thought we'd start with a quick refresher overview. So the process for appeals of administrative decisions is outlined within the Land Development Code, section 2019-16. And just some of the highlights from that section. The Board of Adjustment is to grant administrative officials' decision presumption of correctness, placing the burden of persuasion of error on the appellant. The Board of Adjustment may reverse or affirm wholly or partly, or may modify the decision being appealed. Appeal may be sustained only upon a finding by the Board of Adjustment that the administrative official erred. And then lastly, same as a variance request, a concurring vote of 4 members is required to reverse any decision of an administrative official. So with that refresher there, we can kind of dive into the case before you here. This is, again, an appeal of an administrative decision regarding the denial of a sign permit. The appellant is Arch Simonson, who is present, should you have any questions for him. And then this is regarding the subject property, which is located at 3810 Main Avenue, which is a location of a gas station kind of just west of the interstate on Main Avenue. And so ultimately, the question before the board today is, did staff err in the denial of the appellant's sign permit application? And so I'll go through the staff report here, starting with a quick overview. A sign permit application was submitted by the appellant to replace an existing sign at the subject property. Staff found that the proposed sign replacement would not be compliant with the Fargo sign code, and so ultimately the request was denied by staff. And then the appellant subsequently appealed that decision to the Board of Adjustment, which brings us here to today, and why this item is in front of you. So a quick, more detailed background here. This is kind of a chronological outline of some events regarding the case before us here. So first, the appellant owns and operates a gas station at the subject property, which was constructed in 2004. It replaced a previous gas station at that same location. The most recent sign permit was issued for the subject property in 2005. And then a few years later, the Fargo sign code was enacted in 2011, which replaced the previous sign code at that time. In 2016, the appellant proposed replacement of one of the freestanding signs located on that property. That request was denied by staff on the basis that the total signage of the property exceeded the maximums allowed by the Fargo sign code, and also that the number of freestanding signs exceeded the maximum number of freestanding signs allowed on the subject property. In 2019, the appellant again proposed the replacement of that same freestanding sign, and the request was again denied by staff for the same reasons. Following that decision, the appellant then filed for appeal of administrative decision. These are some of the relevant facts that are outlined within the staff report here that pertain to the case at hand. First, the property is located within the general commercial zoning district. This is relevant just because the sign code, there's different requirements based on the different zoning districts that the property is located within. Second, there are currently 2 freestanding signs on the subject property. This is just a Google Street View image of the property. You can see on the left and the right-hand side, that would be the northwest and northeast corners of the property. There are 2 freestanding signs shown here on the image. Third, the subject property currently contains over 800 square feet of total signage. That's based on records from the Building Inspections Department. Fourth, the subject property has frontage on only one street, which can be seen in the Exhibit 3 on the right-hand side of the screen there. And then additionally, the subject property has 175 feet of street frontage. That would be along the frontage road adjacent to Main Avenue there. And then lastly, the facade of the primary building on the subject property is approximately 1,728 square feet in area. And that's relevant based on the amount of total signage for the subject property. Additionally, I want to point out a few relevant code provisions. I don't necessarily need to read through each of these, but these are some of the relevant code provisions as it relates to the request. First is permitted sign types, freestanding signs. Basically, this states a parcel fronting only on one public street shall have no more than one freestanding sign unless the street frontage exceeds 300 feet, for which case a second freestanding sign is allowed. The next provision there, on-premise signs, sign limitations. This basically outlines the formula for calculating what the total signage would be allowed for a subject property when you add up all the signs on the property. It's basically the greater of two different calculations, either 2.5 times the linear street frontage or 30% of the facade of the primary structure, whichever is greater. Next, section 20-1310 talks about non-conforming signs. That states a sign that does not conform to this article, meaning the Fargo sign code, is a non-conforming sign. See also section 2013-02A, a non-conforming sign that is permanently affixed to the ground or to a building may continue to be used, except that the non-conforming sign shall not be replaced except in conformity with the provisions of this ordinance, shall not be enlarged, altered, or rebuilt except in conformance with this ordinance, but it may be repaired to the extent necessary to maintain it in a safe and sanitary condition. The next provision talks about damage to non-conforming signs, some similar provisions there as well. And then lastly, this is just sign face area, how the sign code defines sign face area for a freestanding sign. So next section of the staff report is the staff analysis. Essentially what this is it's taking those relevant facts and then applying them to the relevant code provisions and kind of outlines the rationale for how staff arrived at the decision to deny the permit. So there are currently 2 freestanding signs on the subject property, whereas only one is allowed by the Fargo sign code. As you saw before, street frontage, there's only street frontage on one street, and then additionally there's only 175 feet of total street frontage. In order to have 2 freestanding signs, there would need to be at least or greater than 300 feet of street frontage, or the property would need to be located have frontage on 2 different streets. In this case, since there's only 175 feet of total street frontage on one street, the Fargo sign code would only permit 1 freestanding sign on the property today. Second, the subject property currently contains approximately 812 square feet of total signage, which would exceed the 518 square feet, which would be allowed by the Fargo sign code. Those kind of sub-bullet points there just show the calculations. If you were to take the square footage of the facade of the primary building, which is around 1,728, 30% of that would equate to 518.4. And then if you were to do the second calculation, which is based on the street frontage, 175 feet of street frontage times 2.5 would equal 437.5. The greater of those two is 518, and so that would be the maximum allowed total signage for the subject property. And so even if you were to remove one of the 2 freestanding signs, the property would still exceed the maximum amount of total sign face for that property. And so therefore, the freestanding signs are non-conforming signs since they do not currently conform to the requirements of the Fargo sign code. And then section 2013-10 of the Fargo sign code states that non-conforming signs shall not be replaced, altered, or rebuilt except in conformance with the Fargo sign code. Since the proposed sign would exceed the number of freestanding signs permitted on the property and would also exceed the total allowable signage permitted on the property, the proposed sign is found not to be in conformance with the Fargo sign code, and therefore staff denied the request based on that finding. Additionally, outlined in the staff report, Staff would contend that the appellant has not demonstrated that staff has erred in the administration of the Fargo sign code. Again, section 2009-16 of the Land Development Code expressly states that the Board of Adjustment shall grant the administrative official's decision a presumption of correctness, placing the burden of persuasion of error on the appellant. So with that, staff is recommending that the Board of Adjustment affirm staff's decision to deny the appellant's sign permit application on the basis that the proposed sign replacement would violate the requirements of the Fargo sign code. So with that, I'd be happy to go answer any questions you may have. I've also got the packet pulled up as well as the Fargo sign code if you want to dig in deeper on any of those provisions or relevant details.
Any questions for staff?
Was the signage originally within the LDC's requirements prior to 2011?
Yeah, we would assume so. As far as we know, the signage that is currently there was all legally permitted at the time. I believe there was a previous request for an appeal administrative decision based on the height of one of the two freestanding signs. So there's that little caveat there, I guess. But otherwise, we have no reason to believe that the signage is illegally placed.
So he would have no problem with it remaining as is?
Correct.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll hear from the applicant. If you could please just introduce yourself for the record.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Arch Simonson, and I'm representing Simonson Station Stores. And I have to tell you that I'm pretty impressed with this room. I've never been here before, but it's pretty nice. And I feel pretty important to be here in such a big room with just me and all of you. So thank you all for coming. Aaron, thank you for your analysis. You did a nice job. And first I want to say that I don't feel that staff has erred in their analysis because they're just following the way the new city sign code was written in 2011. I do want to establish that. I don't necessarily agree with all of that because I don't think it necessarily addresses re-imaging of a sign. And there's a couple of points in the staff analysis that I certainly don't agree with, and I guess it would be if you went to the section of staff analysis, and I think there would be section. I'd like to address those four sections, and number one would be the sign is existing and I'm only requesting to re-image it. That section where they say that the existing sign constitutes removal of the existing sign and placement of a new sign. I don't agree with that from the standpoint that I'm not removing the structure of the sign in any way, shape, or form. That's not what I'm asking to do. All I'm asking to do is basically re-image the sign. And I think in one of the pages on your report, you'll see the before and after. But let me just go back with a little bit of history. Our store was constructed in 2004, and back then the sign codes were different. All the signs at that time were approved and permitted by the city. Then the sign code changed in 2011, as Aaron alluded to. When it came to the request back in 2016 to reimage a sign, actually there's the tall pole sign on that property, which I requested to replace a message center with a digital price sign. And then I also wanted to do some work on the sign to the west, which is the subject sign that we're here today talking about. And when it got to, one of the things we wanted to do to the tall pylon or the tall pole sign in 2016 is we wanted to turn the head. And that constituted the head being over the right-of-way, the DOT right-of-way, about 18 or 16 inches, something like that. And so I had to get permission from the North Dakota DOT to turn that head back to its current or former position. And so anyway, that whole process took like a year and a half. And that's why this has kind of gone on so long. I have to blame the DOT on that because it takes them a long time to grant permission. And the reason that Melissa was concerned about that was because it could affect the right-of-way dollars that the city of Fargo was eligible for. So I completely understood that. I went through the process, got that done. The tall pole sign was then, it was approved to turn that, and the city approved to replace the digital message center with the digital price sign, and we got that done. And then at that time, it was decided that we would make two requests, or basically two permits. And so one was the tall pole sign that you see there today that's about 40 feet high or whatever it is. But the second, and that's all done, but the second sign is the smaller two-pole pylon sign that we're talking about today. And that's the sign that I'm requesting to reimage, and that's why I'm here. But in addressing, the two major issues that I currently have more square footage than what is currently allowed, I would just say that I have to be grandfathered in on that because all that signage was approved in 2004. And so today, what I'm asking for again is to re-image the smaller two-pole pylon sign on the west side of the property, and those changes would actually reduce the total number of square footage of signage that I have on the property, which I think is a good thing. And so, again, I don't think that the Fargo sign code, its current sign code, practically addresses the re-imaging of a sign. In fact, the way it's written, you can't do that. And I don't think that's good for long-time business owners that are in a situation like I'm in. Now that the sign code has changed, apparently I'm not allowed to upgrade that sign in any way. And so, so I'm just going to go into my burden of persuasion, and we'll try to make this short and get everybody on their way, and it is what it is after that. So, but I will say that both of those signs have been on that property. The locations, they've been there for over 50 years, and going back to when that site was a mobile site, we actually reused that sign pole and put our own head on that after we got permission. So I already mentioned that the city approved those signs in 2004, and then they were retrofitted to the Simonson signs and graphics. I mentioned that the sign code changed 7 years later. I do feel that section 20-1310 A and B is especially harmful to long-standing businesses in that business district and others. Those existing signs that are in those types of districts, I think, are, in most cases, I think they fit the neighborhood. And certainly I think that my sign, it works, but I'd like to improve it. And I can leave it there, but I'd rather re-image it and get it to more of a modern day look. And I mentioned that my competitor to the west has 3 signs. I read the staff findings on that. 2 rights don't make a wrong. I get that. But nonetheless, they have 3 signs. They just re-imaged 2 of them just within the last, I'm going to say, 6 months, 8 months, something like that, and made substantial changes to those signs. And again, they have 3 signs and much more square footage than I am currently asking for. So with that said, I think that government officials have a duty to be fair to all business people and treat them fairly. And I'm asking for that today. So in summary, I will just say that I don't feel, I'll say this again, I don't feel that the City of Fargo staff erred interpreting the city sign code. I think they interpreted it right. But I do feel that reimaging a long-standing existing sign, which has now become apparently a non-conforming sign, has not been properly addressed by the city sign ordinances. This has created a hardship on longtime business owners like myself, who are trying to improve the look of their sign and the effectiveness of their sign. I think that the current sign ordinance is contributing to making older business districts look older and out of date. And they will certainly do that if we're not allowed to change them, reimage them. And so I don't really think that that's what the city of Fargo wants. I think that you should help business owners like myself improve the looks of their signage. And again, in this case, it's existing. We have not had one complaint about any of my signs from any motorists or staff or anybody, actually. So anyway, today I'm just looking for 4 votes, 5 if I can get them, that would be great. But I'd like you to approve my request. And I would also like to take it a step further and say that I think that the City Commission should take another look at this particular part of the sign code that would allow for some reimaging of existing signs. I think that's really important. And if I can help with that by what I'm doing today and perhaps in the future, I'd sure like to do that. And so with that, if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant?
Does anybody know if the neighboring station had a permit for the reimaging of their signs?
I didn't specifically look to see if they had permits because I didn't know that they had changed. They can replace the faces on existing cabinets without a permit, and that's totally allowed under the non-conforming sign rules. So the difference here is that at least from what he submitted, it appears that he's intending to remove all of the existing cabinets on the sign and replace the sign in its entirety.
Thank you.
So Aaron, could you flip to the slide that shows what's there existing and then what's being proposed? So basically, the bottom picture there, if he was to take and remove that's good right there. Remove the portion that says, or not remove, but replace the panel that says attended car wash, soft cloth with something different. What you're saying is that would be allowed, correct? Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions?
Oh, there's a little
Go ahead.
caveat in this ordinance. If the appellant would damage his sign, so that it would be less than 50% of the replacement cost, he could do it. And I don't know what the sign improvements cost, but you know, when there's a ordinance or something written where there's a little loophole or some way around it, then I really want to dig in a little deeper and really ask the question, you know, is there a way to approve this? And maybe you can comment on the cost of the sign improvement compared to the cost of totally replacing it.
I'm not sure what the cost to replace the sign would be. We intend to reuse the price signs that are there, and we pulled the electronic message center off the tall pole sign because we didn't think it was very readable, and we also thought it was unsafe for motorists to take their eyes off the road and look up, look high. We know now that message centers that are down closer to ground monument level are much easier to read and get read more. But you know, the message center that we took off the tall pole sign was substantially bigger and cost substantially more. But to answer your question, I don't know what it would cost to replace this the existing sign, but the improvements to this sign are mostly cosmetic. I think the biggest costs when you replace signs are like footings, the foundations for them, and the structural steel and so on, but all that remains the same. So basically, these are just cosmetic changes. And you can see that the newer sign, the one on top, is a little bit smaller than the one on the bottom. And, you know, we think more attractive, and that particular sign also matches, it's the same type and style that we have around the western part of the state of North Dakota. So it's very consistent with our look. And that's what we're trying to get to.
Just a comment, I visited the subject property over the weekend and tried to imagine the new sign, the sight lines, sitting from an exit standpoint, leaving the property. And I found that having, you know, that fresh food area of the sign gone in the new sign would help from a sightline aspect, from a safety aspect.
Correct.
Just
Correct. And that was one of the reasons that we favored this versus a ground monument. I did have some drawings originally of a ground monument sign, but as we started to get through the sign code, we knew that there was no chance of that happening. So, but actually this works out better for visibility, sightlines.
I'd just like to make a comment, just to remind the members here that whether we agree with the sign code or not, I mean, this is not a variance request, this is an appeal of an administrative decision. So we're purely responsible for reviewing the city's findings and making sure that they didn't err in that finding. Again, I sympathize with you because it seems like there should be a provision that would allow you to, you know, maybe update the sign, but that's not in there, and that's not in our purview to decide that it should be in there. I feel that, I mean, if that's a valid concern and then there's more than one person that shares that, then the process should be that it should probably go back through the sign code review process and see if there's a revision that should be made. But, I mean, you stated yourself that you feel that the staff didn't err in their review of the application. You're purely saying that you don't agree with the way the sign code is written. And I guess from my standpoint and the requirements of the land development code, we're purely to review the city's review and determine if they made an error or not. So I just wanted to state that before we entertain a motion. Is there any other discussion?
Well, I also sympathize with Mr. Simonson, but it seems that the code is clear that the shall not be enlarged, altered, or rebuilt, and clearly the sign is being altered. I mean, reimaged is one way of saying it, but it's still an alteration, and you could say it's being rebuilt, even though the foundation isn't being rebuilt.
Yeah, and there's actually a section in 20-1303K2 that says, basically, any alterations of a sign shall constitute construction of a new sign, and such shall require a sign permit. So, I mean, I agree, it's pretty clear. With that, is there a motion?
I make a motion to approve the staff recommendations that the Board of Adjustments affirm staff's decision to deny the applicant's sign permit application on the basis that the proposed sign replacement would violate the requirements of the Fargo sign code.
Okay, we have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second, please call the roll.
Wendell Dobb,
Yes.
Breen,
Yes.
Ford Dunker,
Yes.
Mitchell,
yes.
Love.
Yes.
Thank you for your time this morning.
Yes, and I would encourage you to, I mean, there is an appeal process to take this to City Commission, so, I mean, I would encourage you to, you know, take it to the next level, because that's basically where a revision could come out of. You know, the City Commission could, you know, direct staff to look at creating a revision to accommodate your request, so.
And, I mean, that's great, but I wonder what the support would be for that. I have, you know, maybe Melissa could comment to that. I know that she's had several requests for this type of thing, and, you know, she's got to follow the rules. I understand that. But, Melissa, maybe you could comment? just to help me, if no one else?
There are a number of places around town that we find non-conforming signs just because of the way we write sign permits now. We have much greater access to mapping and locations and sizes. So there are a number of places around town that do have non-conforming signs that cannot update their signs the way they're currently placed, that cannot essentially rebuild them. They can replace faces, they can do maintenance, but they can't completely replace the signage. Staff doesn't really have an opinion on this one. We're happy to enforce the code however it's written, so if the commission directs staff to look at crafting something that would make this easier for people, we have no objection.
Does that help?
Yeah, if you give her some direction to do that.
Oh, we're not, we don't have the power to do that. It would
That
have to
comes
go
from
to
the city
It would
commission?
have to come to city.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay. All right, everyone, well, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
There's no other, excuse me, there's no other business, so is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.